All right, so with our last screencast, we ended by looking at the structure of the tooth. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to look at things that can go wrong in the tooth. And by the time we're done, I'm going to turn all of you into flossers. If you're not a flosser, you will be by the time we're done. So here we go. Problem number one in the mouth. We're going to kind of take this from least severe to most. Halitosis. Halitosis is a fancy word for bad breath. Now you may wonder, well, what causes bad breath? It's actually the waste products from bacteria that are living in the mouth. And you might think, wait, what? I got bacteria living in my mouth? Oh yeah, you've got bacteria living in your mouth. And those bacteria, they feed on the food that you eat and all that food that passes through. There's plenty for them to kind of graze on as it passes through. Plenty of moisture, good temperature, everything they would ever need is there. So you've got bacteria thriving in your mouth right now. Um, and one particular area where they hang out, maybe you remember when we looked at the taste buds, we said you have these little bumps on your tongue, and if you look at the top of them, there's this little groove, and if you look at that groove from the side, you can see it kind of goes down in there. Well, that's a great place for those bacteria to kind of hang out and hide. And so while they're hanging out and hiding, feeding on your food, they produce waste products, and that's what makes your breath stink. And that's also why when you brush your teeth, it's recommended that you brush your tongue, because if you brush your tongue, you're getting in there and kind of scrubbing out those little grooves and hopefully getting rid of those bacteria for a little while. But don't worry, they'll be back. They reproduce every like 20 minutes, so it's a losing battle. Um, those bacteria can cause other problems. Another one is called a dental carie, or you may be more familiar with the term a cavity. And a cavity, it's literally a hole. It is a hole in the enamel of the tooth. And so you can see here what that hole might look like. And what's happening is bacteria on the surface of your molar produce waste products, and some of those waste products are acidic and they slowly can erode the enamel of your tooth. And molars, the top of the molar is a common place because remember how I had you feel the roof of the top of your molars with your tongue? There's all these pits and grooves and things like that. So that's a great place for bacteria to hide and hang out and cause that problem. You can get a cavity in other places, but the top of the molar is a common one. And that's why when you brush your teeth, again, you want to do a good job brushing the tops of those molars so you can clear out any bacteria that might be on there before they can cause damage. You may notice that that hole is kind of expanding once we get through the enamel layer and into the dentin layer. And that expansion is because the dentin is a softer material, and so it's easier for them to cause decay. And then when they get to the pulp, that's where the nerves are, and the inflammation and swelling associated with your immune system trying to fight those bacteria are what causes the pain of a cavity. When you go to the dentist, they actually will look for this. They have that little hook and they kind of press down on the surface of each tooth, and sometimes they kind of push way down. They kind of like shove you back in the chair, and you're like, what are you doing? The reason they're doing that is because if that little hook sticks, that means there's a hole there. And so they kind of test each surface and they kind of look for holes. And if there is one, then they need to fill it. They used to fill with this kind of mercury-based material, which is fine from a health point of view. The solid mercury doesn't cause problems. Liquid mercury can cause problems in the body, but this is fine. But they actually phase them out for two reasons. One, they're less aesthetically pleasing than current polymers, which are white. And two, this is kind of tragically funny. When people die and they cremate them, those mercury fillings get put into the atmosphere and are actually a significant source of mercury pollution in the atmosphere. So yeah, fun fact. So they for a while they thought about passing a law that said you have to remove these fillings before you can cremate someone, but then they realized that, most problem's going to go away because we've stopped using these anyway. So anyway, um, plaque is another problem caused by bacteria in the mouth. And what it is, it's a biofilm, which basically means it's a whole bunch of bacteria that grow on the tooth and kind of spread together. They produce other materials and make this kind of filmy layer. And then other additional materials can accumulate in there and harden. that plaque into what we call tartar. And so here, this is kind of a gross look at plaque and tartar growing on your gums. Now, the problem with this is that the plaque can irritate the gums and cause them to recede. So here you have a nice healthy gum line, and the gums, remember, prevent the bacteria from getting down to that root. So the gums are pressed up against there and nice and healthy. Well, if you've got a bunch of plaque, the inflammation and swelling can actually harm your gum tissue. And so the gum starts to die away and recede, and now the bacteria have access to lower aspects of your tooth. Um, this infection of the gums is called gingivitis, and you can see kind of an extreme version here of gingivitis. And the problem is, as the gums continue to recede, the bacteria have access to lower and lower and lower parts of your tooth. And eventually, this can result in periodontal disease, which is where the underlying bone begins to decay. So basically, the bacteria are able to access the bone that your tooth is embedded in, and you can see that bone is getting destroyed even more and more and more. And then eventually, that's what causes the tooth loss. You may notice when you go to the dentist, one of the first things the hygienists do, it feels like they're kind of tracing your teeth. They're like running this little metal device along the base of your gum line. What they're actually doing is they're putting this probe down in the pocket between your gum and your tooth, and they're measuring the diameter or the depth. And 3 millimeters is a good healthy depth. 4 and 5 means that you're kind of getting into this territory, and that you need to start worrying about this kind of thing. And so you may notice your hygienist typing numbers in as they kind of run this thing around, or mentioning 3s and 4s and 5s, and that's what that is all about. So here's just another picture of that. So how do you avoid these problems? Well, brushing obviously is an important step. They tell you brush at a 45-degree angle against the gum line, and the purpose of that is to get in that gum line where those bacteria are that can cause gingivitis. So by brushing against the gum line, you're sweeping them out of there as best you can. They say brush the inside, outside, and chewing surface of each tooth. Again, just to get bacteria off there and prevent cavities. Do particularly a good job on the back molars, because again, that's a common place for cavities to form. And then brush your tongue to prevent halitosis, and get those bacteria out of those little papillae, those little gaps in the papillae. So that's why you're told to brush the way you're told. Flossing is also critical. When you floss, you make this kind of C shape. It's a backward C, but you scrape the inside surface and you get between the gum and the tooth. And a lot of people say, well, I don't like flossing because it makes my gums bleed. Well, the reason it's making your gums bleed is because you have early stage gingivitis. If your gums are bleeding, you're on your way to this process. And so what I would encourage you to do, take the 1 week flossing challenge. Start flossing for 1 week. It's going to bleed for a while. It may be kind of painful and unpleasant, but you're going to notice a lot of gunk coming out. And if you didn't get that gunk out, that gunk would be sitting there as food for all those bacteria to grow as plaque and continue to erode your gums. And as you pull that out of there each night, you're going to realize, ugh, this is kind of gross. I've been leaving this in there all these years. And I'm guessing that after a week of doing this, you are going to become a dedicated flosser. Yes, it's a pain, it takes some time, but once you get good at it, lickety split, not a problem. So I encourage you to floss. One final thing, not quite enough to just do brushing and flossing. Once every 6 months, you do need to go in for a official cleaning, because despite your best efforts, eventually some things are going to grow. And so this is my hygienist. Her name is Ricky. She was a friend of mine from high school. Isn't that kind of fun? We go way back. So there you go. All right. So before we leave the mouth, there's another several structures that I want to discuss that carry out some activities in the mouth. The salivary glands. So the salivary glands add saliva, which I'm guessing you've heard of, and you can kind of see there's one kind of up. Actually, I think I have a better picture here. We'll get to the picture in a moment. So the salivary glands add saliva, which do a number of things. It moistens the food. and it forms what we call a bolus, which basically means it's this gross, clumpy thing that allows you to swallow. So imagine putting a bunch of saltine cracks in your mouth, chewing them for a while, and spitting them out. That disgusting thing is a bolus. Um, it also releases enzymes to digest one major component of food, and hopefully from that spogle, if I'm not sure if I've assigned it or not yet for you, depending on when you're watching the screencast, but you'll discover that it helps digest carbohydrates. So the bread part of the sandwich is actually chemically digested from these large, long, complex sugars into simple sugars here in the mouth. That process begins in the mouth. So there's mechanical digestion from the teeth and chemical digestion from these enzymes. It also kills some microorganisms. There's enzymes in there that can actually kill bacteria. Again, this doesn't keep up with the ability of bacteria to divide, so but it helps a little bit. Here's that picture I promised that shows where the salivary glands are. And then over here, roughly how much they contribute. So you can see 65% of your saliva comes from the submandibular gland, which is below the mandible of your jaw. 20% come from the parotid gland, kind of back, behind your face a little bit. And then the sublingual is beneath the tongue, and that contributes about 7%, with then some other things contributing the remaining 8%. The sublingual is kind of interesting. Here's some fun facts. Gleeking, I don't know, some people can do this where you go, and you like do this weird thing with your tongue, and you can like launch saliva out. When you're gleeking, you're actually launching saliva out of your sublingual salivary gland. I can't do this. I have no idea how other people can, but some people can do it. Maybe you've been gleeked on, and now you know what that's all about. Calculus and tartar. I mentioned tartar are mineral deposits, and a common place to get a lot of tartar is on the back of your front teeth, those incisors. And the reason why is because the sublingual gland is dumping saliva against those teeth quite a bit. And there's minerals in that saliva that begin to accumulate on the back of those teeth. And so it's a good idea when you're brushing your teeth to try and do an extra special good job on those back front teeth, because if you don't, then that hygienist has to get the hook out and do a lot of scraping back there. So that's a good little area to put some effort into. So then that's it for the mouth. I just want to do a couple more structures here and get us down to the stomach. So once you swallow the food, you enter the pharynx. And you may recall the pharynx was that space where the oral, the mouth, and nasal cavities come together. There's that little flap back there. Hopefully you remember it's called the epiglottis. Whoops, I didn't have that up there. And the epiglottis closes over the airway when you swallow food. So when we looked at the respiratory system, we went down the trachea, which is this tube that I'm covering up right now at that bar. But if the epiglottis closes over, that's going to divert food down the esophagus. And the esophagus is basically a smooth muscle tube that transports food to the stomach. So at this point, that food you've swallowed is out of your control. It is now in the hands of smooth muscle, and that smooth muscle is going to carry it down the esophagus, through the stomach, through the small intestine, through the large intestine. Along the way, materials are going to be added, nutrients are going to be extracted and put into the bloodstream, and anything that's left over is going to go out through the anus. And so with our next screencast the next day, we are going to look closely at that process. So that's it for today. Thanks.